Hi, I'm Amy Koranek. I'm in the Sculpey Design Studio. I want to introduce you to canes and to cane making. So what is a cane? A cane is a two-dimensional design that's been worked out through a three-dimensional rod, or what we call a cane. In this way, you can design a pattern like an intricate flower or even a face or a checkerboard or a stripe. You can work out your design through your colors and then layer it into a three-dimensional piece where the image goes all the way through. You can make canes quite large like this one. This is a smaller one that I made large and then reduced it to this far. And reducing means that I applied pressure to the outside of the cane and then made it smaller and smaller. The cool thing about that is those wonderful patterns that you designed in there just keep getting more and more detailed, becoming very intricate. From here, I went down even further, like this one, and even smaller, like this one. Once your canes are constructed, then you can slice them and apply them to all kinds of projects. This is a beautiful glass vessel that's been covered with canes for a candle holder. It's really fun to put cane slices on ink pens and have those on hand to give away as gifts. And jewelry making is probably one of the most popular ways that people use canes for making beads or for making surface designs like this one. Cane making is fun and exciting, and so let's take a look at how to make canes and what you can do with them. Let's talk about canes and how they're made and how you can take some very simple canes and combine them into more complex canes. So an example of a simple cane would be a bullseye, and this is just like a thin rod of light blue wrapped in slate, and that's a bullseye. You could wrap more and more colors around that to make a bigger and bigger bullseye, but that's a good example of a simple cane. Another very simple cane would be a jelly roll, where you take two or more colors and roll them up in jelly roll fashion like you would make a pastry. Another simple cane would be the Speckle Cane, and that's just a lot of different colors layered together inside the rod to make what's called a speckly pattern. And let's reiterate one more time that a cane is making a two-dimensional pattern, but it runs all the way through a three-dimensional rod, and that's what we call a cane. Now, once you've made some simple canes like the bullseye, the speckle, and the jelly roll, you can easily combine those to make a more complex cane like a flower. And so this flower was made with all of those canes. This flower is very similar, but in a totally different color combination. We're also going to take a look at how to reduce a cane to start out with a larger cane and make it smaller and smaller so that you can have a variety of sizes to use for jewelry making or for whatever project you have going. This is another flower cane that is actually built up from very simple canes that are used to make the petals and the inside. This is a very large cane that I made over a year ago, and so we'll also talk about how to reduce a cane that has been sitting around for a while, because I made this a couple years ago and then just completely forgot about it. So I'll give you some tips about how to get that moving and get it more reducible. So let's set some of this out of the way, and then we'll make the bullseye cane first. For the bullseye cane, I am using this pale blue Primo, and I'm using a sheet of slate gray Primo. Now, I really like to use Primo or souffle for cane making because ultimately, when I make canes, I'm probably going to use them for jewelry or for home decor projects. So I want to have a clay that's very reliably strong and easy to work with, and so for that I like to use Primo the best, and a lot of people also like to cane with souffle. I have a sheet of slate gray that I've already sheeted through my pasta machine to the second thickest setting, and I just need to start by making a straight edge to line up to. And then I just have like a little rod. This was about a 1/4 bar of pale blue, and I'll lay that along my straight edge. And I'll make sure my straight edge is sealed up tight to the pale blue rod, and then I'm just going to roll this very tightly forward, and I'm going to touch the edge that I cut to the sheet of clay. And hopefully you can see that that gives you a little guideline impression that you can cut along. Now I always cut inside the line because typically when you pick up the clay, it's going to want to stretch more than anything. And so now I'll just use my fingers to pinch this tightly closed, like so. You don't want that to overlap for a bullseye. You want just the outside wrap to touch itself. And then I'll just roll it gently on my work surface to close it up and to make the seam go away. Okay, now I'm just going to trim off the ends. And I use a rolling cut because I am very warm and my clay is warm and this room is kind of warm. And so instead of just smushing down through the cane with my blade, I'm actually using a rolling cut, which makes the blade go through the clay more gently, and it doesn't smash the shape of my circle. Now I'm just going to gently close up that little air pocket I see in there. If I wanted to, for a bullseye cane, I could continue to wrap and wrap and wrap with more and more colors, and it would end up looking like a bullseye or a target. But for this process, I'm just going to use a 2-color bullseye. Now these are also bullseye canes, and I started with a cane that was this large, but now I want to show you how to reduce down to a smaller size so that you can use that cane to make what's called a lace cane. And ultimately, this is a lace cane, and I'm going to show you how to get to there. So I'm using a gentle pressure, and I'm starting in the middle of the cane and rolling, and I keep turning it end to end because my body mechanics, everyone has a certain way that their body works, and my body mechanics will, if I don't flip it end to end, I'll continue to get, like I might get this reduced in a taper. And so I've just learned over the years that if I flip end to end, that I reduce the cane more evenly. Now everyone's going to have their own way of working, and you just have to figure out what works best for you. But I'm always starting in the middle and rolling outward toward the ends. That helps push air bubbles that could potentially be in there out. I'm also using this section of my fingers. Some people can use their whole hand to roll a cane. I've learned that I cannot do that because I end up denting my cane, and I don't want to do that. I want to keep it as smooth as I possibly can. Now the next thing I can do is, once the cane has really moved now, it used to be this big around. And what you can also do is take off a piece and save it in its thicker size so that you can use that later. But I'm going to reduce the whole thing down. Another way to reduce once the clay is warm and really moving evenly is to grab the ends and pull. And that tends to stretch it into a very uniform way so that it's not creating bumps or thick areas and thin areas. But start with some, if you haven't caned before, start with some simple canes like the Bullseye or the Jelly Roll that I'm going to show you next, and work out from there, because that is a really good method of learning some simple techniques and some simple ways of working that will help you achieve better complex canes. Okay, so that looks really good. So now what I can do is I want to actually section this into 8 equal pieces. I'm going to use 7 of those pieces to create this pattern that's here. This has 6 outer pieces and then a center. That makes 7 pieces. That's called a lace cane. So a really natural transition from bullseye cane would then be to lace cane. So I'm just going to cut this in half. And I'm going to use my rolling cut again. to cut all the way through. So I cut that really well without, you know, smushing it or distorting it. And then I'll cut each of these in half. And it's okay if they're not exactly the same length. So now I have 4. And then I'm going to go to 8. See if I can roll all these at once and cut through. Very good. That way I didn't smush. Now a lot of people, a good technique that people use for cane making also is to build a cane and then let it rest for a day before they cut it. Everyone comes up with their own special techniques that they really enjoy. And some people like to put their canes in the refrigerator and let them get really cold and take away the body heat and the room heat and the lighting heat before they cut canes. So these are also good tips for you know, slicing and storing canes and letting them rest before you cut through them. What I'm doing now is I'm assembling these into sort of a flower pattern where I've got one rod in the middle, and then I have each of the outer rods is kind of nestled in the gap between the other two that it touches, and this will be my final one. So it takes 7 rods to do that. This 8th one, I've cut off this 8th one just that way I'll have some extra bullseye that I can use for other projects. Also, it's easier to divide a cane into an even number of pieces than an odd. So that is why I did 8. Now, if you want to, you can slice off the end just to keep it more, you know, visually manageable. You don't have to, but I like to kind of start with a clean slate. This is the flexible blade. It is a lot thinner than the rigid blade, so it's also good for cutting, slicing cane pieces without smushing them. Okay, so that is how I took a bullseye cane and I changed it to a lace cane. All right, let's set this lace cane aside for now. Ultimately, we're going to change the shape of it because it'll be good, really good packing for a flower cane. I want to show you what I mean by packing. So when you make a flower and it has these lobes of petals, what I call packing is this negative space between the petals. And you have to have pieces of cane to fill in that packing area so that when you reduce this, your petals don't float around and fill up that space. So I'm going to set this aside for now, and then later I'll show you how to change the shape of it to create a packing. Next, we're going to move on to a bullseye cane. I'm sorry, we're going to move on to the jelly roll cane. And this is another super simple Next, we're going to move on to a jelly roll cane. And a jelly roll cane is another super duper simple, basic cane that once you've mastered it, you can use it to create lots and lots of, other more complex canes with it. So to make a jelly roll cane, you're going to want to start with at least 2 colors. You can use more colors if you want. And this is mint green and forest green. These are both Primo again, and I'm using all Primo today because that's my favorite. And I have these sheeted through my clay conditioning machine on the thickest setting. So now what I want to do is just kind of get these to be an equal size and shape that is going to be a rectangle. So I'll just trim the edges. You can use any of your favorite blades to trim this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to press both of these sheets together back through the clay conditioning machine on the thickest setting, and that will seal the 2 sheets together. It will push out air bubbles, and it will also thin it so that it's a very manageable thickness for creating the jelly roll cane. So I've got my clay conditioning machine off to the right here, and I've got it on the thickest setting, and I'll just give it one pass through. So now I have a beautiful two-tone sheet, and they're really married together well. I don't see any air bubbles. Air bubbles are kind of the enemy of cane making, so you want to make sure that you're using good technique, that you're conditioning your clays really well, you know, that you are being careful to not trap air inside the cane. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a lead edge, and I'm cutting it at a little bit of an angle toward the forest green. And my first choice comes in, how do I want to wrap this? Do I want to wrap it so that the mint green turns out on the outside, or so that the forest green turns out on the outside? And I've decided that since this is going to be my packing between the petals, and this is going to be the petals, what the color I want to be up next to that slate gray, I think it'll look better if the mint green is on the outside, because it's going to actually touch that slate. And so I think that's going to provide more of a contrast. If you look at it this way, I think that's going to provide more of a contrast to the slate than the forest green will. I think that's pretty obvious. So I'm telling myself that I'm going to roll it up with the mint green landing on the outside. Now, a lot of times for a jelly roll, I like to put a center rod in the middle. And so I'm using a super high contrasting color for my middle piece, which would be white. And you just need to take enough white to make a little skinny rod to put there through the middle. Just conditioning up some white primo, and then I'll roll it into a really thin little rod. Doesn't take a lot of clay. And it just adds like one more detail element. It also makes it easier to roll your jelly roll up if you have something to roll it around. Let me just take a second and remove this little bobble here. And I'll lay my white on the very edge, and I'm pinching that forest green up to touch. I have the forest green facing me because that's the color that's going to be on the inside. And the mint green, as you can see, I'm starting to roll this up, the mint green is going to be on the outside now. So at first, you need to be really diligent about making this roll up neatly without trapping air bubbles, and you want to go really slow. But it seems like once you've got that going, then you can roll it up fairly quickly. It's a lot easier to handle the thicker it gets. Now when I get to that back edge, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to trim my clay at an angle again, and I'm going to trim it back toward the mint green. And the reason I cut that at an angle is all it's doing is creating a thin place for me to blend the end of the roll into the body of the roll, like so. It's just making it less bulky than if I didn't cut it at an angle. And then I can trim these little guys off. And there is your jelly roll cane. Now I intentionally made this one bigger than my original one because once I had made my flower that came out of my head, I had time to analyze it and decide how I wanted it to look better and have the details be more apparent. And I felt like I needed to make my petals bigger so that they could have better detail visually. So that's what I did. Now, like I said before, at this point, if you wanted to, you could let this cane rest, or you could refrigerate it for an hour or so and that would make it more firm so that it's easier to slice. And a lot of times people will also let their canes rest before reducing them. So we'll set this one aside and we will make the speckle cane next. Next, let's make a speckle cane. And this is my original speckle cane that I put in the center of this flower. And I felt like it had way too much going on. It's too busy because I want my speckle to look more muted and just a nice background color. So I dropped the slate and the forest green, and I'm just going to use the mint green and the pale blue and white. So just take equal or close to equal proportions of the colors that you want to use and make them into similar sized rods. And speckle canes work really well with analogous or monochromatic color schemes where the colors are very closely related to each other. Either they're near each other, right beside each other on the color wheel, which would be analogous, or monochromatic might be like dark blue and light blue and white, and those make really nice speckle canes. So I've just bundled all three colors together, and now I'm reducing them to make a long piece that's easy to section and rebundle. So there's that. Now I'm going to cut it in half and in half again, and then regroup these. And just regroup them randomly. You're not trying to create a pattern. In fact, you're trying really hard not to create a pattern. So bundle those back up and then start rolling again. And I can pull it down really quickly if I stretch it. So this is probably around 7 or 8 inches, just to give you a reference. Cut it and group it again. When you rebundle it, look at the end. Look at it from the cross section and see how the pattern is going. Because with speckle canes, you could conceivably just keep reducing it, cutting, resectioning, rebundling it, and you could start reducing it to the point where you can't see the individual colors anymore. And you don't want to go that far. You want to be able to enjoy each color as it is inside the cane. So I think we could go one more time. Let's just cut it open and see. Yeah, we could go again.
On your way.
Okay, this time I am going to bundle them up like this, but I'm not going to let it reduce a lot. I just want to form it into a nice round cane. And then once I have it round, I'm going to stop and wrap it in the slate color to make it have a nice border. And I really like the way those colors look together. Also, another tip for speckle canes is I'm not really allowing the cane to twist as I work with it. I'm trying to keep it really straight. So I'm looking at my stripes and I'm not letting them twist around the cane. When you start letting them twist, they kind of create weird ziggy patterns inside, and we don't want that. Okay, now I'm ready for a border. So I'm going to put a dark contrasting border on the outside. And this is the slate again, and I'll just cut a couple straight edges. I've rolled this through the clay conditioning machine to the 4th thickest setting because I really want this to be a very fine line. So I'm just cutting my slate down so it's just as wide as the cane is long. I'll carefully wrap the slate to the side of the cane and then roll it up. I'll let the slate touch the slate, and then as I roll it back, I can see that little line that I created. I'll cut just inside of it and then finish rolling that up. Again, you just want the outside of this outside wrap, you just want it to butt together. You don't want any overlapping because that would create a little bump in your wrap, and we don't want that. Okay, I'm going to set this is going to be the center of my flower, and I really like that so much better than the center I did here. And since I get to do this cane twice, I'm going to make improvements and adjustments to make it even prettier than the first time. Why not? So I'm going to set my speckle cane aside and go back to working on my petals again. So to make the petals, I'm going to pull my jelly roll back in, and I've already reduced it from that short, thick cane, and I showed you how to reduce a couple times now with the Bullseye Cane, and with the Speckle Cane we reduced several times. Next, what I want to do is divide this into even sections to create my petals. So This is just really close to 6 inches, which is an easy dimension to work with, because what I'm going to do is divide this into 3 equal sections, which would be 2 inches each, and I'm going to cut each of those in half to make a petal, because I need 6 petals. So with my ruler, I'll just mark this at 2 and at 4. Then I'll just get my ruler out of the way, and I'll do a little rolling cut to preserve the end. There's my mark. I'll do a rolling cut. Okay, and here you can see I've got my outer green line is super straight, because that's going to be a good way for me to judge how to cut this in half. Now, if you want to, you don't have to cut these in half. It just depends on the style of petal that you want. So for example, this was a full round cane that was just pinched slightly down to make the, this is actually a 7 petal cane, so I just pinched the edge to make it fit better around the center. This cane has 6 equal round rolls around the outside, and this one is going to be cut in half. So a couple ways that I can gauge cutting this in half is, number 1, I can cut right down that line, and first thing I'm going to do is score the cane, because even though it's been sitting a while, it's still quite warm. And so if I give it a little score, my blade is already you know, broken through the outerness of the cane, and I can just go right through. Now the other thing I'm looking for is that as I'm cutting down through there, I'm trying to make sure that my blade is going right through that white center. See that? Dividing that white center right in half, so that when I open up my petals, I have, voila, equal amounts of white on each side. So I'm going to score this again. And the score line just kind of helps me not smush the cane. Also, I'm going to pick it up and double check that my blade is aiming right toward that white center. And then I'll open it up. So far, so good. One more time, score it. Make sure your blade is aiming right toward that white center, and I'm a little off on this side, so I'm gonna kind of creep over, make sure I'm getting white in the middle of each one. Okay, good. Next, I'll show you how to assemble the flower from these 6 petals. Okay, what we want to do first is I'm going to slightly bend the edge of the outsides of the flower up toward the middle, so that when you look at this from the end, you've got now more of a crescent, kind of a crescent shape. I'll do that with all 6. I'm pinching the edges and also kind of pulling them up to make a little crescent. That one didn't quite go as deep, so I'll do it some more. This is helping the shape of the petals have a roundness to them on the interior that will match up to the center of the flower better. It's kind of hard to press a flat-sided petal to a round center, so I'm actually changing the shape of these to be more rounded. If you look at it from the end, you can see that little crescent shape that I'm going for. And then we're going to bring the center of the flower back in and start organizing these around the center. All right, the center of the flower is going to be that speckle cane. So without doing anything to it, let's just see how these fit to it. That way we can get a good guesstimate about how much we need to reduce the center. Ideally, we want our petals to touch side to side with no gaps. And so there's a really big gap right here, and there's a smaller gap right here. So that means I need to reduce the inside of the flower to accommodate the size of my petals. And you just have to take this part slow and just work at it a little bit at a time, just to make sure you're coming up with you know, a really proportionate looking flower. Okay, that was my guesstimate right there. I'm gonna patty this down so it stands up by itself. That's all I'm doing is smushing the ends flat so it can stand up. Now I'm just gonna try it again, and I'll go, let's call this 3 and 9, or east and west, whatever you wanna call it, right across from each other, and then I'll try the next 2. Now I'm not using a lot of pressure, I'm just laying them on here so I can see how they fit. The pressure part comes in a little bit. I just want to make sure that they are going to fit really well. And we still have a gap right there where it's too big. So pull it all apart. That's why we didn't use a lot of pressure. And just reduce it slightly more. Okay, now that I've reduced it again, this is longer than it was before. So I'm going to put my petals all the way down to my work surface so that they can stand up down there. And I need to pick this up and look at it to my eye and make sure that I have the petals, you know, as straight across from each other as possible. That way I know I have equal distance here and here to add more petals into those negative spaces. So now this one, I have a feeling it's going to work out the way I want it to. So what I'm trying to do now is snug this little corner of this petal right in up next to the corner of the last petal. And you can already see how changing the shape of these petals to have a curved edge instead of a flat edge, how helpful that is. Now I'm tucking this little corner in right up to that last one. And see, now I have no gaps between each petal. The end looks really nice. If I want to stand it up again, I'll make sure that these gaps are pushed in, and then I'll add the last 2. Tuck that little edge of that corner right up next to the other one. Make sure this gap right here is closed. And then this petal takes up the remaining space. Now, if you have the opposite problem where your center is too small and your petals are overlapping each other, a way to adjust for that would be to pinch the tightness or that crescent shape of your petals even smaller, and that would make their size fit a smaller interior cane even better. So you've got ways to make them fit if your inside cane is too big or if it's too little. Okay, now I'm just going to trim this off because that's a really good speckle cane that can be used in other ways, and just save that. Our flower cane is now assembled except for where we need to pack in between here. So in order to reduce a cane, the easiest way to do that is to have it be a very simple geometric shape, like round or square or even triangle. A flower-shaped cane is very hard to reduce. So what we want to do is bring our lace cane back in, and we're going to change it to a triangle shape that will pack in all these negative spaces. So this is the bullseye that we turned to a lace cane from before, and it's been sitting and resting for a bit. So now I'm just going to change it to a circle, a round cane, and you can see that it even by itself makes a cute little flower. So lace canes are popular for their simplicity, but also because you can make them look quite complex. So for example, you could section this and regroup it, and it would just keep getting lacier and lacier. But I want to show you how it looks right now in its kind of flower stage. And then I'm just going to keep reducing it thinner and thinner, and I can also reduce it by pulling on the ends. Let's get rid of this junk end down here. You can save that for scraps. Now what I want to do is change it to a shape that will go in this negative space easily. And to my way of thinking, if you look at this from the top down, a triangle, if you envision that as a triangle, that works out really well. And a triangle is quite easy to make out of a circle cane. So what you do is just lay the cane flat in front of you and pinch the top. And as you're pinching it, you can see it's getting longer. It's reducing while you pinch. So there's one point. Turn it a third of a turn and re-pinch this edge. You can turn any round cane into a triangle by doing this method right here. And one more turn, and I just pinch a really tight edge on this third side. Again, as I'm pinching, it's also reducing. Now I use my fingers in this way to really smooth out the edges, because when I pinched, I made a lot of little finger marks in it, but if you stretch that back out and smooth it with your fingertips, those go away really easily. Okay, now what we want to do is trim off an end, and here's what we have is a little lace cane turned to a triangle. And what I want to do now is compare the size and shape of this triangle to the gap in between my petals. And I can work with that right there. I also want to make sure I have enough of it. So my flower cane at this point is about 2 inches long, so that means I need 12 inches of this bullseye cane, which I have almost exactly, so we're going to go with that. Okay, now I don't trim it. What I do is I pack it in there. I take one of the points of the triangle and I push it down between two petals. And then I trim it. And then I go exactly opposite that one and I force the top point in between two more petals. And spin it around and trim it. Okay. Then I just choose another section and force the triangle point down in there. Make sure you're getting that point right between the petals. Trim. Go opposite that one. Fill the space. And trim. Two more to go. Push the point down in. And then the final one. Okay, now what I want to do is go around and finesse all these triangle points right to the side of the round cane. So we're changing the shape of the cane from a flower back to a round. And I'm kind of doing the top one and the opposite one at the same time, making sure those points of the triangle lay really flat to the round cane. This way, when we go to reduce it, you've got those fillers between your petals. If you don't have fillers between the petals and you start reducing this to a round, from a flower to a round, the clay will just make its own determination about where it's going to fill in those gaps, and you want to be in control of your design, so you have to be able to fill those gaps. Okay, now what we can do is start reducing. So I'll just give it a gentle roll. Hear that clicking noise on the work surface? That means it's not completely smooth yet. That means that those stripes are still sticking up above the edge. But they will eventually lay down really flat. Okay, what I want to do now is preserve some of this cane in its large state, because It's really nice to have different sizes of canes. So I'm just going to roll cut some of this away, and then I'll save that. And I really like the way that turned out. I'm glad we made some adjustments from this pattern. I think the petals look really nice against that new speckle center. Okay, now what I want to do is I'm going to save this piece in its large state, and then I'm going to reduce the cane further. And I'm just kind of pinching and trying to apply an even amount of pressure all the way around so I can start reducing again even further. Now there's as many techniques for reducing canes as there are people who make canes. So there's no 100% right way. You would learn a different method from every single instructor that you take a class with. So just adapt what works for you and do it how it works best for your body mechanics. Now when I roll it, you can't hear that clicking anymore. That's because it's completely flat on the edges. Another great thing to pay attention to is that your stripes are really straight. This flower cane has a naturally striped outside, and that will help you keep your cane from being twisted in the center by paying attention that these stripes are really nice and straight. And there's another size. And then what we can do is just keep reducing this one down even more. And then you'll have a whole family of matching flowers, but in different sizes, which gives you a lot of really nice things to work with to make coordinating beads or earrings or pendants, or to cover a vessel that you might want to make a tea light or a candle holder. And you have all these great different sizes to work with that work well together. So look how cute those look. And if I wanted to, I could reduce this one down even further and make even smaller, probably to the point where you can't even see them anymore. We could even use this flower to give a little bit of contrast in there. So that is how you'd use very simple canes to make a complex flower cane. Next, let's take a look at cane storage. Once you start making a bunch of canes and you don't use them all up, you need to find ways to store them so that they're easy to use later. And my good friend Anka from Germany, she made all these canes for us. And I just want to show you basically a simple way to store canes. Most boxes like that you find for food storage are going to be safe for storing canes in. Another way that you can store them is to use, this is deli wrap that like they process lunch meats and stuff in, and you can buy this in bulk at big club stores, and then you can have things like this to individually wrap canes in, like if you need to travel with your canes, if you're taking them to a meeting or a retreat, you can wrap each one individually. You kind of want to keep them from touching each other, so wrapping them up like this would allow you to create layers of storage inside where the canes can lay right next to each other. And that way you can get a lot more space out of the box for storage. You just want to keep all your canes cool, and you want to keep them from dust and dirt accumulating. So little boxes or wrapping them like this is a good way to store them. Also, you can use kitchen stretch wrap to wrap canes in, and that will give you a really great way to store them for future use.